All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Cuse Access. I'm your host, Vinton O'Brien, and today we're going to be talking about the 2015-2016 Syracuse men's basketball team. I'm going to be titling this video "What Could Have Happened," because if you do not know already, the Syracuse men's basketball team went to the Final Four that year and got blown out by North Carolina. So we're going to be talking about, how the season went, what could have gone differently, and had it gone differently, could they, in an alternate timeline, take down Villanova in the national championship. So let's get started. Going into his 40th season with the Syracuse Orange didn't come easy. Head coach Jim Boeheim had been going under a lot of pressure ever since the start of the 2015 season. He had a mediocre season the year before. The Orange just barely made it past 500 on the season, finishing 18-13. Up until about 2021, Jim Boeheim had never had a losing season, so that season kind of, walking the line was a little scary for him. They only played the regular season in 2014 due to ongoing investigations regarding student athletes and their academics sparked by the loved and hated among the Syracuse community Fab Melo. The investigation placed the Syracuse Orange under bans and sanctions that prevented them from competing in the ACC tournament, March Madness, as well as the NIT. It also placed sanctions on the program itself with transfers as long as a season's worth of wins from Jim Boeheim. I think they took about 100 from Jim Boeheim. He holds the second highest win by any coach in college basketball history. So the sanctions and bans that the Syracuse team once had were lifted just prior to the 2015-2016 season. In 2015, the Syracuse Orange were still fresh in the Atlantic Coast Conference, otherwise known as the ACC by many sports fans. They had left the Big East Conference for the ACC due to ongoing conference realignment within the college basketball world. However, some angered fans speculate that it was strictly a money grab, but the Orange were needing to make a splash in the competition. They recruited 3 soon-to-be stars to fill in the shoes of Rakeem Christmas, Chris McCullough, just to name a few. These stars were known as Malachi Richardson, Tyler Lydon, and Frank Howard. Frank Howard didn't really get a lot of playing time during the 2015-2016 season, but he did get a lot of playing time going into 2017 and 2018, playing alongside Tyus Battle. So Malachi Richardson and Tyler Lydon, you will often see them within the starting 5 of the roster. So these incoming freshmen joined the forces of the current elite level players, Michael Gbenejje, a transfer from Duke University, and Trevor Cooney. These 2 seniors and 3 freshmen made the team look a lot like the 2003 national championship team. A lot of Orange fans had very high hopes. Now, this season started out like any other season does. Typically, the Syracuse Orange plays the first 4 or 5 games versus weaker out-of-conference opponents that Syracuse should win against. They roll through these first 4 games to go into this mid-season invitational held in the Bahamas. It's called Battle for Atlantis. It's typically held around Thanksgiving. They played a pretty good competition throughout the tournament. They played the Elon Phoenix in the first round, the Charlotte 49ers in the second, the former Big East rival, the Connecticut Huskies, otherwise known as UConn, in the semifinals, as well as a top 25 Texas A&M team in the championship game. Syracuse swept away all the competition and took home several wins from the Battle for Atlanta. Syracuse now is at 8-0 to start the season. With things now looking up for the Orange, they head into the annual ACC Big Ten Challenge. This year's matchup for the Orange was the Wisconsin Badgers. Syracuse doesn't typically do good in these Big Ten matchups. They haven't. Their most recent win was from a season or 2 ago from Indiana, where they beat them. I believe it was 102-100 in overtime. So it was a very high-scoring affair, very, very highly competitive game. But Syracuse typically does not do good in the Big Ten matchups. The Badgers came east to the then-called Carrier Dome to take on the Orange on their home court. Syracuse would then fall to the Wisconsin Badgers, being juiced of their undefeated dreams. This was followed by a 7-point loss to Georgetown at Georgetown. This game, if you don't know, is very important in the central New York area as well as Washington, D.C. It carries over from I believe, the late 80s in the Big East days of Syracuse, the peak Big East. The last game was being played in Manley Fieldhouse, and Georgetown basically it was their senior night at the Manley Fieldhouse, and Georgetown won on their senior night. The head coach came over to the microphone and was like, Manley Fieldhouse is now closed. And that has sparked a massive rivalry ever since. Syracuse fans are pretty much bred with hatred for Georgetown and the Hoyas. So after this, the Orange went 4-1, headed into ACC play to close out the non-ACC play, just the typical out-of-conference teams. The Orange started off cold. They lost 4 straight. One of those games they only lost by 1 in overtime. They went on a little 7-1 run, taking down big names like the number 20 at the time, the number 20 Duke Blue Devils, and the number 25 Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Their one loss came to the number 13 ranked Virginia Cavaliers. They've then finished the regular season going 19-12 after losing 4 of the last 5 games. So going into March Madness, not looking too good. Typically you want to, go into it with a little momentum. However, things were about to heat up. Now this is where things start to pick up in the season because, as you all know, the season didn't end too well for Syracuse going into March Madness. They were selected as the 10 seed that year. They spent a little bit of time on the bubble that season, as is tradition. It's typical of Syracuse to sit on the bubble for the whole season. Well, if they're doing good. It's hit or miss whether they make the tournament or not. Media doesn't really like Syracuse. But this March Madness was special. Syracuse does pretty good as the underdog in the tournament. As stated before, they were selected as the 10 seed, and they would then face the 7 seed in the opening round, the round of 64. They would face the 7 seed Dayton Flyers. They breezed past them in a 19-point victory, then played the 15 seed Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders in the round of 32 by a whopping 25 points. On to the Sweet 16, thought most Syracuse fans confidently until they saw their next challenge, the 11 seed Gonzaga Bulldogs. Now Gonzaga, around this time, now we know them as kind of, we don't really want to call them a blue blood because they're still a mid-major school. They're from the Western Coast Conference, so they're not really in a big conference. They play light competition. However, they dominate in the tournament every year. So it is a questionable thing to call them a blue blood or not, even though they really do well every year. But around this time is where you really see them start to heat up, and they just so happened to play Syracuse in the tournament. Syracuse barely managed to win. They only won by 3 after previously decimating their teams that they played before Gonzaga. So then here lies their next challenge. The Elite 8, the 4 seed Virginia Cavaliers. The winner of this wins the Midwest. If you scroll back a bit in the video, you know that Syracuse was blown out by Virginia halfway through the season. Kind of messed up their winning streak in the ACC play. They were blown out by Virginia at Virginia. But this time it's different. Tournament Syracuse has kind of like an all or nothing mindset to their agenda. They're if they're doing hot, they're doing well, they get this momentum going, it's over. So they take down the Cavaliers in a stunning 68-62 battle. Syracuse winning this Elite 8 matchup against Virginia really set them ahead, making them the Midwest champions, sending them to the Final Four for the 6th time in school history. So this Final Four matchup coming up is against a familiar face. They faced them earlier in the regular season at UNC. They only lost to 5 to the Tar Heels at the very end of the regular season. And this time, the North Carolina Tar Heels were number 3 in the East, and they blew out Syracuse 83-66. Now in the modern day, I, as a Syracuse fan, have to live in this horrific timeline where Jim Boeheim only retired with 1 ring instead of having 3 from 1987, where they lost to Indiana, 2003, and 2016, which could have won. This is where I come in as a crazy, wild Syracuse fan, making up all these scenarios that will never happen. So this begs the question, what went wrong? Earlier in the season, they only lost by 5 in Chapel Hill to the Tar Heels. So what went wrong this time to cause the Orange to lose by 17 in the Final Four? Could the Orange have won if they had played a little differently? So I watched both the regular season matchup, where they lost by 5, as well as the Final Four game. I couldn't find the full Final Four game, but I did watch the highlights. So I kind of compared and contrasted them to see what went wrong for them to lose by 5 and then what went wrong for them to lose by 17. So my final verdict was that the regular season game ultimately had a lack of physicality. They didn't really do well rebounding defensively, and they just had poor shot selection and poor perimeter defense. So UNC was, they were able to take that lead a lot during that game. There were a few lead changes here and there, but UNC was able to come out on top, win by 5, just because Syracuse didn't rebound on defense. UNC was able to chip away at the basket on putbacks. They couldn't really defend the perimeter very well. UNC throughout that game passed along the perimeter a lot, as well as if they were open and they were a shooter, shot the ball for a 3. Then taking a look at the Final Four game, Syracuse looked like they just weren't in it. Just from the very beginning, they didn't have that the mojo to succeed. They just were lacking in all departments. UNC they came to play, they wanted to win. So everything was lacking, just to the point where they just could not succeed no matter what. So now the final question, say Syracuse does beat North Carolina, if they were in that game, had they rebound, had they upped their defense, had they win? Are they beating Villanova to win the national championship game? I am saying no. And that's just Villanova was just way too dominant, not only throughout the season that year, but also in that national tournament game. Yes, the score was only decided by 3 points, but that 3 points was decided by a buzzer beater. Now, if Syracuse, they get blown out by UNC, say they beat UNC, it's only going to be by, like the regular season game, say like 5 or less is how much they beat UNC by had they win. They're not beating Villanova. So that answers the question. Could they win 2016? I'm saying no. So yeah. Thank you all for watching my video. I'm only going to show a portion of this in class. So if you came from my class and you're watching this video, thank you. Subscribe if you want to keep up with Syracuse athletics. I want to try and make some Syracuse videos, like news and stuff like that. Maybe even video essays like this one. So stick around, like the video, subscribe, comment, whatever you want to do, and have a nice day.